fine. I don't care. Like, I have gay married friends, and I'm fine with them being gay married. But this is not law.
You cannot tie imperialism and racism and slavery to just one race, which is pretty much what every single exhibit does.
All right, so Jillian is completely correct, of course.
Yeah, like gay marriage, I don't care. Just, I don't think it should be in schools and being taught to kids and all that stuff. Just, you're an adult, you learn, you're private, whatever. However, Obergefell is unconstitutional.
I was also curious about that in America. How much in elementary school do they teach you about gay marriage? Is that a course? Is that like part of the curriculum? Like at a certain point to like, and now I know we've been finishing our chapter on history. We've finished mathematics as well. Now we move on to gay. That's the next topic. We're going to be doing gay. So now we will teach you all about gay history, gay marriage, all the gay. Yeah, it's going to be super gay.
And psychotic. And it was a 5-4 decision where they
There's
basically said,
fair enough. I didn't know.
Legislative action.
See, I was under the interpretation that like y'all barely get like sexual education anymore, because that would obviously be like hypersexualizing children. So you can't even teach that. So you can't teach people about anything. You know, are teachers allowed to say if they are heterosexual and married that they have a wife? Can a guy be like, I have a wife? Can a woman be like, I have a husband? Or would that be indoctrinating the kids?
35 states having already banned gay marriage. We are going to force you to accept it. Now, the liberals like to go, yeah, but look at civil rights, right? In the civil rights, they deployed troops. I'm like, yes, they passed a law. Congress passed a law, the Civil Rights Act. And this is the right of Congress to do. You elect reps, the reps then pass laws, and the Supreme Court then interprets the Constitution to determine whether or not we are following what is legal in this country based on precedent, etc. In this instance, SCOTUS just went, yeah, I mean, we got modern sensibilities, right? Right. Okay, you can be gay married. They did the same thing with sexual identity recently. They were like, there's no law, but we're going to say, sure, just do it. I think if you look at the current makeup of the Supreme Court, it's an easy 6-3 decision overturning this. However, I was talking to Josh Ham.
The shitty thing is he's probably not wrong. That is probably what's going to happen. It's supremely fucked up. But here's how I would view things, especially not being an American, right? When it comes to civil rights, they are fought for in a variety of ways. Sometimes there are laws passed, sometimes there are Supreme Court decisions, sometimes there are victories, and sometimes there's unfortunately a lot of suffering that comes along the way. Ultimately, do you as a person, regardless of how it happened, are you interested in having same-sex marriage be legal for everybody? Because what vector it takes to get there, whether that be through a Supreme Court decision, whether that be through a vote, whether that be through a mass protest that eventually leads to politicians taking action, something to that effect, ultimately, do you feel that that is the right thing for society? And if you agree with that, well, for me, yeah, you can say that a lot of these are built upon flimsy interpretations of the Constitution of the United States, which seems to be always open to interpretation, especially under Donald Trump right now. He seems to be violating aspects of the Constitution actively that don't get pushback from the same people on the right. You know, you don't get people who are saying like, holy fuck, how the fuck could you do that? But in this case, if it's like, hey, I got nothing against gay marriage. I have gay friends who are gay married. They do gay stuff, and I have nothing against that. But I'm completely fine if there is a overturn of this that effectively may annul their marriage licenses. But because then it can go down to states' rights, effectively. Because why should every state be forced to have to do this just based on one decision that basically tries to interpret the 14th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States to be used this way?
Earlier, and he said that there's something called, what is it, stare decisis or something like that? I don't know what the word is. The question is, will they take the case? He argued they won't because it was recently ruled upon, so in 10 years. And so John Roberts and some of these other justices are going to be like, no, we're not going anywhere near this. He may be right, considering the only Supreme Court justices of moral clarity, strength, and confidence, it's Thomas and Alito. So the rest are going to be like, but we're scared. So if it does happen, it'll be a year from now.
This is so fascinating in how opinions of Americans' opinion on gay marriage has changed over the past 20 some odd years. I'm reading right here in 1995 something like, close to 25% of the population supported gay marriage, and now it's up to almost 70% in this day and age. Despite whatever you believe on the legality of it, I'm not a lawyer, so I won't speak to the specific legality of it. I think it will be politically detrimental, though, because I'm reading even in the Republican Party, nearly 50% of Republicans support gay marriage.
But that's also a really important point. You have to recognize that, like, one of the reasons that there starts to be a change in just, like, you know, society and general acceptance of these kind of things is because after there is a passage of a law, regardless of your interpretation of the Constitution and how you got there, all of a sudden there are more people who got married, who were gay. And it turns out it didn't result in the complete destruction of society. It turned out that, like every other person who are heterosexual and getting married, that these were just people in love who wanted to get married. And they got married. And they started families. And they bought houses. And they had jobs. And, like, again, society did not crumble. This turned out to not actually have the effects that a lot of people were worried. This has to be between one man and one woman. You know, it was Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. What's going on here? And then it's like, okay, well, people are getting gay married. People are, you know, moving to the city. They may even encounter a gay person. They may work with one. They may have a gay friend. And they may even know a pair of lesbians who also go to the same school as them. It turns out, through encounters with them, they're totally normal, lovely, and wonderful people. And so public sentiment starts to change. In the same way nowadays, right? It would be pretty weird for people to actively be saying, you know what, I think maybe segregation is a good thing. I think that there should be separate restaurants, separate theaters, separate seats on the bus. I think there should be separate drinking fountains. I mean, it's shorter lines for everyone, right? So I think we should basically segregate society based on the amount of melanin you have in your skin. Well, how will you determine that? That seems pretty fucked up, right? Well, they had these old things back in the day. They were capable of kind of determining that even if you had a certain amount of, let's just say, blood, you could say like a 1-drop rule or something like that. But, like, depending on the amount of, again, the unpure blood that one has, we can determine whether or not you're allowed to go into that restaurant and eat there. And then, yeah, I mean, shouldn't we go back to that? You'd instantly be like, so you're a Klansman, right? Like, no one outside of a Klansman would be actively advocating for segregation in 2025. That just sounds so absurd. But here we are when it comes to gay marriage, right? It's just one of those things where it's like, well, you know what? I don't have anything against gays, not gay married, whatever. But I think that this is a very flimsy defense. I think, you know, using the 14th, Amendment to the Constitution to protect people's privacy and what they do in their own homes isn't a really good defense of this. And honestly, we should just revert it back to states' rights. Let the states decide. If the red states want to say you can't be gay, I mean, isn't that their freedom? Don't they have the freedom to tell you and oppress people that they should have the freedom to oppress people? I got to be honest with you. And so, yeah, why does everyone have to tolerate this?
It's low.
Yep, it's been collapsing. So the numbers, I think it was like 55 a few years ago, and it dropped down to 41. And you can bless the hearts of the LGBT far leftists who were doing sex acts in the street in front of children for why that is.
This is definitely a backlash to that, but I suspect they...
What are you talking about? Based on what? Based on your own fucking Google search history? Like, I did see a photo. I don't know if you've seen the photo, but apparently at one of these pride events, there were two men. They were dressed as, I believe, dogs. Yes, canines, if you will. And then they were holding each other via a belt. And a child can be seen in the shot. I mean, that's the far left radical extremists there, right? We were completely fine with the gay after you had fought and bled and died for a lot of your own civil rights. If you just kept it away from everyone else. You just kept it inside of your own homes. You never held hands. You don't kiss in public, because that again would be sexualizing yourselves in front of people. We just don't want to have to see it. And then we'll just bombard you with a surplus of heterosexual sexual images and ideas and media all the time. That's basically how all of society works, and we can just go back to that situation. Is pretty much what we're looking for.
They won't take up this case because of the political consequences to this. I think there would be what?
Because they're cowards.
Essentially, yeah.
Because
and because the president wants to keep his majority in the midterms. I think if you pull a big move like this, I think it's unnecessarily like applying pressure. Like, I don't know what this is manifestly changing in our country, because I don't think all the married people would now suddenly be unmarried. A lot of gay people would just be grandfathered in. And I think like this is something that could cost the Republicans a midterm.
They would be
they would be unmarried.
So what happens is 35 states, I believe, have a ban on gay marriage, will not recognize the marriage licenses. So if you're married...
So it'll be the same thing like with reproductive rights. where it's just like, yeah, they're waiting for the Supreme Court decision to fall. Once that happens, that allows all the red states to do what they do. And we've all seen the absolute disaster that resulted in, right? Like, you just have horror story after horror story after horror story that is coming out of these red states that have now officially outlawed a woman's right to have reproductive freedom, outlawed a woman's right to have bodily autonomy. There's now forced pregnancies and forced births being imposed upon these women, just horrifying fucking conditions and situations, and all of the, disasters that come from that, where people seek out to have, unlicensed abortions that can have, terrifying and horrifying effects. You are seeing people trying to cross state lines, getting arrested, like all that kind of stuff happens because you are regressing as a society through these decisions. If Tim is right here, which again, grain of salt, but if he's right, this gets struck down, and all the red states immediately are just like, all right, so we are now going to effectively annul all the gay marriage licenses. So anyone who has been married already who was gay is now going to have your license revoked. I mean, what does this really tell you about all the people along the pathway, your Dave Rubins, your Benny Johnsons, who are just completely fine being, either token or closeted people advocating for Donald Trump's regime while gay rights are being stripped from everybody else?
If you got married in one state, then 10 years later moved to another state, you're officially unrecognized. So you're not legally married as far as the state's concerned. You'd have to move back to one of these other liberal states.
I think this would be a huge political liability.
It'll happen. Yes, you're right. Doesn't matter. Roe v. Wade was too, and it happened. And maybe the question of whether to take the case up is the good one, but I gotta be honest. Obergefell is one of the most retarded opinions in the history of the Supreme Court. It
legally, right?
Yeah, legally, just it's a garbled nonsense. It makes no sense, and the liberals cheer for.
So the Supreme Court ruling, the court held that state bans on same-sex marriage were unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment. The decision was based on two key constitutional principles. Due process clause, the 14th Amendment, protects fundamental rights, including the right to marry. The court ruled that this right applies equally to same-sex couples. The equal protection clause, also the 14th Amendment, states cannot deny equal protection of the laws by allowing opposite-sex couples to marry but not same-sex couples. States were discriminating unconstitutionally. This ruling required that all 50 states issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples. States also had to recognize same-sex marriages performed in other states. This effectively legalized same-sex marriage nationwide. It held that marriage is a fundamental constitutional right that cannot be denied to same-sex couples, making same-sex marriage legal in the U.S. I can tell if you were, like a fucking raging homophobe, or in the case of Tim, a closeted homophobe, I guess, why you would be against this.
For it, because gay marriage. But I'm like, fine, I don't care. Like, I have gay married friends, and I'm fine with them being gay married. But this is not law. This is fascistic legislation from the bench without any cultural precedence. This is not democracy. This is not a republic. In that.
So you're saying abolish the Supreme Court then? Because you're saying that there shouldn't be a small team of mostly old people who are capable of just, doing the highest form of the law. You don't want to have the three branches of government. You can just have these kind of decisions come on down. Even though the fact that, the Republicans and the right have effectively stacked a Supreme Court now, you have generations of this to look forward to. I mean, the decision after decision, after gay marriage gets struck down, the next thing will be, well, I don't know. What about when black people marry white people? Is that legal? Why is that legal? Is there precedent here? Could we prevent that from happening? I mean, you're going all the way 1950 back to 1920, back to fucking 1800s. Soon they'll be wanting to just openly own people as property again.
As a country, had slavery for like 90 years. That's it. And we're comparing this to countries that had it for 900 years or longer. Well, it was announced recently that President Trump would be doing a review of the Smithsonian's museum exhibits to make sure that they, quote, celebrate American exceptionalism, remove divisive or partisan narratives, and restore confidence.
Omega, thank you for the $4.99 dim tool out here, cringe, Maxine. Always is.
In our shared cultural institutions. Which, yes, that is what our publicly funded museum exhibits should do. So that's very good. And they talked about this on CNN last night. And you could only imagine what their take was. Jillian Michaels was a guest, but she's the one person on the panel who did not see this move by Trump to be some great horrific act. And so here's how that conversation went. Listen.
Have you looked at some of the things that are being reviewed?
Slavery was a bad thing that was to talk about.
Okay.
Like he forgave
He's
me for
not
saying that.
whitewashing slavery. So
he's not?
He's not. No.
Okay.
He's not. And you cannot tie imperialism and racism and slavery to just one race, which is pretty much what every single exhibit does. But let's talk about the fact that when you
can't tie slavery.
let's talk about the
You
fact
can't tie
that
Slavery in America was.
do you realize that only less than 2% of white Americans owned slaves?
But it was a system of white
Do
supremacy.
you
know,
realize that
African
slavery
Americans
is
were
thousands
slaves
of
and
years old?
White people were
Do you know
the slave
who
owners.
was the first race
I
to
didn't
try
realize
to
this was
end
controversial.
slavery?
What is that?
Okay.
Well,
I'm
what's
sorry, Julie,
controversial?
So what's wild here, again, because, you know, we've already seen this clip, and I'm still waiting for Anna Kasparian to disavow her co-host from their podcast for talking like this. Again, these used to be the points that were relegated to Stormfront. They're kind of quick gotchas for people to be like, well, okay, wait, hold on. And it's kind of just like, well, I just want to make you think. Have you thought about this? Okay? Have you ever thought about the fact that slavery, for example, existed outside of the United States? Have you thought about that? Have you thought about the fact that, like, the majority of white Americans, even during slavery, didn't necessarily own slaves? Have you thought about that? We're always supposed to feel all guilty about this kind of thing, but, like, you know, not all white people had slaves. Okay, hashtag not all white people, not all slave owners. And then can we also talk about the fact that who abolished slavery? Because I think maybe white people should be getting more credit for that at the end of the day. And so I'm just going to throw that out there. Now this is on a CNN panel. It's on mainstream television. It's out there in the ether. Again, this kind of it used to be these kind of like gotcha talking points that groypers, 4chaners, and fucking neo-Nazis and stuff online would drop. But now everyone has to kind of sit there and we just let it stew. And now it's become part of the discourse. And now it's just become part of the Overton window just being moved way the far back. Way the far back, because now a lot of people who might not have even thought about these things are suddenly thinking, that is true. You know what? And it is kind of weird, isn't it? Apparently in countries in Africa, they were selling slaves to white people. Well, what's up with that? I have a lot of questions now. This is really important.
I'm very surprised.
This is an extraordinary exercise in historical revisionism.
I'm really surprised.
I'm experiencing audio issues. Is everyone? All right, hold on. I can reset it. The audio is fine. The audio is fine. Oh, okay. Well, hey, if you're experiencing audio issues, please just check it out on your own end too, because, you know, when there's close to, you know, there's like 800 people watching right now, some people might just be having their own audio issues on one end, right?
Jillian, I'm surprised that you're trying to litigate who was the beneficiary of slavery and who was not.
What I'm trying to tell you is that
in the context of American history.
Okay.
In the context of American history, what are you saying is incorrect by
I'm
saying that
you
it was white
cannot-
people oppressing black people?
Every single thing is like, oh, no, this is all because white people bad. And that's just not the truth. Like, for example,
And that's never been the case. But this is the argument that white supremacists make. And this has been an argument that's been effective. And honestly, it's probably where the US is headed right now, is you are going to see a lot more just overt and blatant white supremacist rhetoric being told, where people are going to have to kind of sit there. Like the CNN panel is just kind of so shocked that in 2025, these talking points are now being regurgitated as in like, whoa, what? Okay. I mean, let's break them down one by one, but we don't have time for that. No. Let's just be like, wait, what? Holy shit. Okay, well, I didn't think we'd be talking about that. One, no one is saying that white people today, in the current day and age, have to feel guilty for slavery because they don't participate in slavery. But you should understand these systems, because these systems can kind of explain a lot of the socioeconomic factors that have led to the current racial dynamics that still do exist within the United States, whether or not you are or are not the benefit of a system of perhaps white supremacy. And like, what's wrong with learning about that? Doesn't it interest you? You should only hate to learn about this kind of stuff if you are in fact a white supremacist who wants to uphold these kind of systems rather than tear them down. The idea where it's like only 2% of Americans, white Americans, you know, during slavery owned slaves. Have you talked about how there's a huge difference between the people who lived in the North, where the textiles were manufactured, where the banks that profited from slavery were holding all the money and distributed in it, and the South, where there was, of course, the cultivation of cotton and the picking of cotton. In the South, the percentage of white Americans who owned slaves was much higher. It was 20 to 25%. In some of the southern states that were primarily economically driven by cotton, that number rises to all the way to as high as 50%. That's a huge amount of people who owned slaves. The other important thing was, were white people okay with slavery back then? And for a long period of time, the consensus of the moral majority was yes, this was very economically advantageous to people who happened to be white during that period of history. That allowed them to accumulate a large amount of wealth. The other thing, the point where she's like, well, I mean, yeah, but the slavery existed before the North Atlantic slave trade. It did. The huge difference was, when you want to bring up how white people were also enslaved, say under the Ottoman Empire, they were not enslaved because of the color of their skin. There was not a racial subjugation in slavery. That is what made the North Atlantic slave trade, outside of the scale, the scope, and the brutality of it, unique. You had heritable slavery, as in your children were born into slavery based on the fact that they were considered to be genetically inferior. If you were black and you had black kids, those black kids were default slaves to be possessed and owned by white people. That's incredibly fucked up. The amount of people who were dying on the boats as they were being brought over to America were of numbers that apparently were just, this was done on a scale, an industrial scale, that had not been seen before in human history. And we should also talk about the fact that, yes, it was European colonizers who arrived to North America and who initially tried to enslave the indigenous populations of North America as well. They had difficulty doing that because indigenous people were dying in very, very high numbers because, again, they weren't resilient to a lot of the diseases that were being brought over by the colonizers. So as a result of that, they started having to import large amounts of people from countries in Africa because they were more resilient to the diseases that the colonizers had brought over to North America. All of this paints one of the most horrific, chapters in human history, and not something that anyone should want to ignore or try and whitewash or tell again. Like, if you talk about how, well, yes, other countries engaged in slavery, other nations, I should say, engaged in slavery, such as the Ottoman Empire, they weren't enslaving white people for the fact that they were white. It was not like you were white, you were considered therefore genetically inferior, therefore we have a right, a biblical right, I might add, to now enslave you in perpetuity forever, including your children, the descendants of your children, always. That is something unique, and that is something horrifying. The idea of racial subjugation, racial classification, is invented during that period of time. And it's invented, again, to justify the oppression of other groups and people. In previous forms of slavery, slavery is something that could be done because you lost a war, because you had incurred debt, because you were born into the wrong, tier of society, the fiefdom, if you were a serf, whatever that may be. But it wasn't specifically because you had a certain or a lesser or a higher amount of melanin in your skin and everything that comes from that. And then the ramifications of once slavery started to be abolished in other parts of the world, well, guess what? It was abolished in Haiti before it was abolished in the United States through a slave rebellion and a revolution that occurred where they were killing their masters. That happened before the United States went to a civil war over slavery with the South. Mexico abolished slavery before the United States. There's many countries that had done it actually prior to the United States. This is not something where all of a sudden it's like we should also be crediting the United States and white people for solving these problems. And again, nothing I have just said out loud is to make people who are white, like myself, feel guilty. It's not. This is just history. This is the history of humanity. We're all the same animal. There is no such thing as race. There's no such thing as different races. This is an entirely thing that we made up rather recently in the sum total of human history and civilization in order to justify the subjugation of other groups that we were classifying based on arbitrary traits, such as what is the color of your skin. That means that you are in fact genetically inferior. We're going to have to justify this through all kinds of quackery and pseudoscience and skull measuring and finding out whether or not you had the proper brain casing and all this kind of shit. But that doesn't mean that you should shy away from the real history of how we got to where we are today, because it can explain a lot of things. It can explain how post the war, the Civil War in America, where yes, a lot of the states in the South wanted to fight to uphold slavery, and then the states of the North unified, and they ended up fighting each other, effectively beating the traitors, and so the Confederacy shall not rise again. That became the new version of the United States, one in which, yes, they are going to now abolish slavery. The idea of the post-slavery, you're going to have, a benefit be given to all those who were previously enslaved. They're going to get 12 acres and a mule, for example. Then comes the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, which of course does not lead to the 12 acres and a mule being given to every single person who had previously been enslaved, which would have allowed them to generate a lot of accrued wealth over the years. Instead, there has to be an appeasement that is done with the South, who are still pretty fucking racist and sour that they lost that war. And so we start doing things like, well, let's venerate Confederate soldiers. Let's build up these statues. Let's enact laws so that we're going to now segregate society. In a system of apartheid, we're going to have these Jim Crow laws that kind of dictate that, well, separate but equal, right? That white people and black people, well, we shouldn't be able to own black people as property. We can agree now at this point that's kind of fucked up, but we should still understand that they are inferior to white folk, and that white people and black people cannot coexist within a society, and one half of that society needs to be continuously oppressed, and this is going to make it more difficult over the years and years and years for that group to accrue wealth. Because again, what is one way for you to generationally accrue wealth between each single, your father to your son to your grandson, is through the ownership of property, and then enters in redlining, where of course black families are disproportionately not going to be able to get the same kind of bank loans, be able to buy affluent property in the areas that have better schooling. As a result of that, there's going to be a lot of regions of the United States that have large demographics of black people that also have very, very high levels of poverty and disenfranchisement. And this continues until, it's not as if it ends with the civil rights movement, where you have a movement of black people effectively trying to stand up through a lot of forms of resistance, some of it violent, some of it non-violent, but across the board in order to try and achieve some form of equality or more equality in any way, shape, or form. Then you enter the modern era, where all of us probably were born in or grew up, where you start enacting these new laws, like the 1994 crime bill, or laws that are disproportionately going to target brown and black people and start to incarcerate them at very, very high rates. This disproportionately starts to lock up a lot of black fathers as they disproportionately start being in jail. This is where this modern myth of it was welfare that started having black families fall apart. No, it was locking up all the dads. It was disproportionately locking up all the black dads of these families, not letting them grow up with their fathers. That's really, really fucked up. That's still happening. We haven't even brought up the fact that within the prison system, there is forced labor where you're not paid, which is effectively still slavery. We're back there. And all of this being done along the way, it's like you now have a better understanding. There's a reason why black people, black scholars, like Du Bois, for example, were some of the originators of sociology, the entire discipline, because they were people who wanted to understand why this is. You always hear these weird debate bro talking points where it's just like, okay, well, we've had, other groups that have been oppressed in the United States, such as Chinese immigrants, and they had very bad laws passed against them, and they were capable of now rising to be, by proportionality, one of the highest income earning and highest success rate stories in the United States. So what does that explain to you about perhaps, the lack of black people's ability to do the exact same thing? Don't you want to understand why? I do. I'm curious. That sounds like a fascinating. Why? I do want to know why. Let's look into that. Let's look into the Chinese Exclusion Act. Let's look into the idea of how all of a sudden the United States started importing immigrants who happened to be of very, very high education because they wanted to have this very, very high producing workforce. And through years and years of doing that, through this system of the model minority system, they effectively were bringing in a large amount of people who were from one demographic or one community that progressively were very already highly educated because they wanted them to be productive parts of American society, and that resulted in a very large amount of people, and now a demographic that has a lot of success within the United States story of immigration and resettlement. But that's different than a group of people who were first forcibly enslaved and for years and years and years. And we're not even talking about the epigenetic damage that might do to people generationally. But either way, that is now being added to a long history of just continuous oppression. When you look at the United States history or even Canadian history towards Indigenous people, because you get the same things in Canada, you'll get people who bring up those facts where it'll be like, why is it that we keep giving, all of these natives, all of this money, we keep on pouring these billions of dollars from all these court settlements, and there's still all these high rates of alcoholism, there's still all these high rates of sexual abuse, of physical abuse, all these high rates of kids having to be taken away from their parents because their parents are delinquents or drug abusers. Or why does this keep happening? All right, it must be something to do with the people themselves. Can we have that conversation, or is it racist? Is it racist for me to bring that up? It is, because we know that there's no such thing as race. And so if we know that, then let's go further than that. If you are a curious person like myself, I want to know why these things exist. It's actually a lot more fascinating. It's a lot more fascinating than black people are lazy, than indigenous people are alcoholics. Yes, that's just racism. There's a lot of things that can explain this. There's a lot of things that we can look towards. And yes, it's complex, it's vast, there are multitudes of things happening simultaneously, and there's no easy solution. You can't just simply say, if you give group Y money, that'll solve all the problems. There's a lot of stuff you have to do because these things are both institutional and structural, and you have to undo the structural oppression, you have to uplift those communities, and you have to do a lot of different things. But that is like, it's so much more interesting than certain races have low IQ. I mean, yeah, you gotta say it. I mean, have you heard Sam Harris? They did the testing, right? You can look at it. Maybe it's brain weight. I don't know. But the genetic differences are pretty clear. We have to be honest about that. No, that's pseudoscience. It's not true. Humans have done some pretty cool things. We completely mapped the human genome. It's called the Human Genome Project. Look it up. And through doing that, they conclusively revealed that there is actually no biological determining classification for what we as people call races. We've just thrown people into different categories based on, again, things like the color of their skin. This is one of the reasons why what is or what is not white changes over time. People who are considered to be in the in group of white people sometimes were in the out group of white people. It's one of the reasons why Italian immigrants and Irish immigrants to the United States for a long time were not considered white. You would see signs on the signs. It would say no Jews, no Irish, and no N-words. Like, just look it up right now. You will see that, like, there were restaurants, there were places in the United States that would put those signs up there because these were considered the out group. Even though Irish people have fair skin, even though they have white skin, even though Jewish people, for all intents and purposes, you would say, oh, that is a white person. Yes, that is a white person, and they're ethnically Jewish. They could be both, right? They might have white skin, but they're also a Jewish person. In the same way, I could have an indigenous mother and have white skin. Like, yes, human beings are interesting and complex. This is all fascinating, but aren't you fucking curious is my thing. Like, that's, I find that racists or people, white supremacists in this case, right? Because I consider her a white supremacist because she has an agenda. And her agenda is obviously to put this stuff out there and to just ask questions, and all of a sudden to have a lot of people, white people specifically, start to think about this in a totally different way. Like, I was told that racism's bad and that slavery was bad, but no one told me in school that apparently white people were enslaved. No one told me that. That's pretty fucked up. Why were they hiding that? They were just trying to make me feel guilty for being white. I was told that it was colonizers, European colonizers, French, British, Spanish colonizers who were basically enslaving black people and bringing them to the New World. They weren't telling me that apparently in the countries they were getting them from, in Africa, they were also enslaving black people and they were selling them to the colonizers. No one told me that. Why don't we ever talk about other forms of slavery? You know, there was slavery in Egypt. We don't ever talk about that. The Ottoman Empire had slaves. Why don't we talk about that either? Why are we always being told? I just found out, because I was watching this lady on CNN, that white people actually ended slavery. In a lot of ways, we're all the heroes. We, the superior white race, the benevolent white race that was capable of seeing that this was bad and then shutting it the fuck down. Why don't we ask these questions? Why doesn't anybody? What's going on here?
Every single exhibit, I have a list of every single one. Like, people migrated from Cuba because white people bad. Not because of Castro. Yes, no, it's in there. That's what I'm saying. You don't actually know.
She's only halfway there too, right? She's like, because white people bad. Not because of Cap. It's all in there. It's all in there, all right? I got links. I got a YouTube video or two. I got some shit to show you. You're gonna have your mind blown when you see this stuff.
What's in there? Do you know that when you walk in the front door,
what exactly,
the first thing you see is the gay flag?
All right, so Jillian is completely correct, of course.
Theocratic fascist, white supremacist Matt Walsh agrees in totality? Oh, no, I am shocked. What? Sir, you made a movie. It was called Am I Racist? Well, I guess the answer was yes. It was probably a short watch.
The other people on the panel are looking at her dumbfounded. And that's not a put on, by the way. They're not feigning ignorance. They really just have never heard anything that she's saying. The things that she...
No, they're shocked that these kind of talking points in 2025 on a panel, on CNN, on national television are being regurgitated publicly. It's one of the reasons why a lot of them are just trying to be like, you're not serious, are you? Like, they were just trying to give her low-hanging fruit to try and, like, steer the course, right? Like, no, she's not a white supremacist, okay, like, but you understand that this was a system of white supremacy that primarily and almost exclusively benefited white people, landowning men. That they would be the benefits of a system of slavery in which white people were considered superior to the inferior race, which was considered black people, who then had to do indentured servitude in perpetuity, including their children. If they had children, those children were born slaves, and they would grow up as slaves, working as slaves. No money while they were doing hard, backbreaking manual labor. They were being tortured, they were being sexually assaulted, they were being beaten, and all of that money and that accrued wealth was going towards the white families for generations and generations and generations of just accruing this wealth. The same, like the states that maybe had very low ownership of slaves, because in the North, a lot of the slavery and the ownership of slaves, and this was the same in Canada, were known as house slaves, people who worked to do domestic duties, people who were cooking and cleaning and working, again, for no pay. They were still slaves. They may not be doing cotton picking when they were living in the North, but that was still a system that existed there. And there was still beneficiaries of that slavery, because it was the textile factories in the North that were actually making all the materials that were being sold. It was the banks, a lot of the banks that were situated in the North of the Americas, where again, all these profits were being kept. So this was an entire system, an entire country that was benefiting from the North Atlantic slave trade. And to simply say, well, they're not telling the whole story, though, because not every white person owned a slave. Gotcha. And America ended slavery. Double gotcha. I mean, I'm assuming Matt Walsh, because we know so little about his family past, he really likes to keep everything a dirty little secret. He's got to be the descendant of, like, Confederate soldiers, maybe a coward or two who was like a military defector as soon as they saw the writing on the wall and the war wasn't going their way, and they're like, oh my god, and then, you know, they found some other fucking, like, you know, someone's fucking soldier dead on the ground, took his, like, clothing off and then put it on, and then you're like, oh no, I'm a northerner, no, I'm fighting. Yeah, let's get them. You know, I believe in the United States of America. Yep, that's me, all right. They don't call me Smith. I'm a Walsh. Ah, all right. Okay, there you go.
She's saying they've never, when they're looking at her stupefied, right? They can't process it. Well, that's because they've actually never heard it before. The level of sheer overwhelming historical ignorance of most quote educated Americans these days just cannot be understated. And that's not to let them off the hook or to excuse it.
No, but like, hey, I'm never gonna give Matt Walsh, like, you know, anything. I am gonna say to people who might be uneducated on these topics, or people who haven't had an interest in them or read a lot about them, you know, the whole idea of, like, maybe liberals are annoying to you. I get that. Liberals are fucking annoying to me too, okay? So I get it. The arrogance of the overeducated liberal, the person who actually had the privilege to go to fucking college and the privilege to have all this education, and then they think they know how the world works, and they want to sit there and be like, do you not acknowledge your white privilege? Do you not understand? All right, you are doing microaggressions, and then it's a white person saying that to you, to another white person that maybe bugs you, and you're just like, oh, these fucking libs, they're so annoying, and a lot of them just don't give two fucks about this. They just want to feel like the rightest person in the room and condescend to you. And you can even see, like, white libs condescending to, like, black people and being like, you don't understand, I have so much privilege over you. And you're just like, well, is this not racist? It feels racist. Kind of feels like all of that. All right, so put that all aside. Matt Walsh is by definition a white supremacist, right? Like, he justifies the genocide of indigenous people. He considers it to be a noble thing that happened in history because it brought in the superiority of the Western civilization. He believes in the Western civilization being God-given superior civilization that he associates directly, even though he can't say it out loud all the time. But we're getting there. He's a couple more years of this, because this stuff is already being normalized. The Overton windows going like that. You're going to start to see them talking about this kind of stuff in a lot more overt terms. You're going to start hearing terms like the superiority, how we used to speak in his college show back in the day, the superiority of the Anglo-Saxon race, or how race mixing and miscegenation and things like that have resulted in dilution of the proper and pure stock. So you're going to start hearing terms like that. I know it sounds like something out of a fucking Klansman rally, but that's basically where the United States is headed. So when he starts speaking about that kind of stuff, just know he's wrong. He is so fucked up and fundamentally wrong, and it's coming from a place of hatred and bigotry. And again, for as much as he wants to condescend on these know-it-all libs, he also wants to rule over other people for his perceived superiority. What he thinks are innate and God-given gifts that he, as a white person, owns and should have dominion over other groups because they are inferior to him. That's the way his brain works. And that's how he governs himself, his reporting and his talks. Sometimes it might seem confusing because he might come from an angle of, I'm just going to do 2 years of content vilifying and targeting trans people. All he talks about, trans people, trans people, trans people. For a long time, that was his lane. That was the place where he was able to get a lot of popularity and have a lot of people listen to him, and a lot of people suddenly be like, yeah, this is easy for me to understand. I don't want my boy to be called a girl, and I don't want you to mutilate their genitals. That's scary. This is really easy. Okay, all right, I agree. I don't agree with everything he says, but here we are. That's because, much like, again, the Nazis, he has a classification of people that he considers to be inferior, genetically inferior, on the genetic level. That can be people with disabilities, that can be homosexuals, that can be trans people, and that includes indigenous people, black people, again, people who are not Anglo-Saxon white. Because you don't hear terms like that coming out of the mouths of people who aren't deep in the racist sauce, but he does. He's one of the folk who uses that term, the superiority of the Anglo-Saxon race. And that is a huge calling card. That's how you know you're dealing with a Nazi. A Nazi who, yes, over the years of the normalization granted to him by Ben Shapiro, has managed to put on a lot of masks and wear a lot of masks over the years. And even though he seems extreme, because again, he's picked a lane where it's a lot more socially acceptable to be an outright bigot. And that was against trans people. Because again, this was a group where he felt safe, just constantly going on his show, constantly just taking a microphone and just vilifying trans people, dehumanizing him. But that is still part of his broader project, the same project that has been in existence since neo-Nazis have been doing the exact same thing with the exact same tactics and even the same language and strategies, I might add. He is just repeating it. He's unoriginal in that, but it's still just as dangerous. And now he's getting to a point where he feels much more comfortable talking about the superiority of the white race. Now, he's not outright using the N-word. He's not saying the Anglo-Saxon race should have dominion over all the inferior races because, again, they are genetically inferior and have low IQs. He's not quite there yet, but he's not far away. Again, with the way that America is going, people like this are a couple years away from saying those quiet parts out loud because it's all about testing and normalizing it. It's one of the reasons why him and Matt Walsh were saying things like trans people need to be eradicated from society. Now, they said transgenderism needs to be eradicated from society, but you know exactly what they meant, right? And when pressed on it, they had to hide back behind the terms of service of YouTube and their platforms because, don't fuck with the bag. But they were doing that thing where all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, I said transgenderism. As in, I'm not saying that I want to necessarily eliminate trans people, but I want to eliminate their ideology, which I see as an ideology. And once we can get rid of their ideology in the same way that we used to torture gay people to try and stop them from being gay. You remember that, right? We used to chemically castrate them. We used to electrocute them. We used to literally kill them. There was a thing that we did. I'm trying to bring that in the modern age for trans people. And yeah, I guess that's as socially acceptable as I can take my bigotry for now. For now. But maybe if Donald Trump was in power, if there was outright authoritarianism, if fascism was coming back, if we were able to normalize these ideas, talk about them, and then just bring them into the real world and manifest them, then more people would think like me, more people would talk like me, and more people would start to understand where the real project is going. And here it is. Again, Nazis. Not always was. The left wasn't saying that because we were just trying to like abuse that word. I know a lot of people are like, oh, you leftists call everything fascist, you call everything Nazis. It's because, again, these patterns are not original. These statements, these ideas, and these strategies that he's employing, they are the same strategies that the Nazis were employing. He might not be directly tying, say, homosexuality to being Jewish. That was something that the Nazis did. They tried to, say that either being a drag queen or being trans or being a homosexual was part of what they considered to be Jewish degeneracy, and that was how they would tie the two, because Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld, who they originally targeted, was both gay and Jewish. This was one of their strategies. That might not be the exact calling card of Matt Walsh, but targeting the exact same groups and targeting with the same strategies of saying that they're a danger to children, same thing that the Nazis did, saying that the very, very high crime rates of some of these groups that he considers to be genetically inferior, same thing that the Nazis did, trying to isolate and target specific groups based on, again, what are considered to be racist stereotypes, degenerate stereotypes of how they saw them, things like that. It's all, once again, manifesting itself here, and he's doing it openly. And again, this is not going to be that different from a couple years from now, where he's just straight up saying the N-word.
Don't let this happen to you. Go to serfscoffee.com to order the only end-to-end owned indigenous coffee company that delivers blood-free, conflict-free, and cruelty-free beans right to your door. 0% of people who drink serfscoffee.com have exploded spontaneously. By ordering right now, you get 10% off plus free shipping, and it's the best way to enjoy delicious coffee while not exploding. That's serfscoffee.com, serfscoffee.com.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. This video wouldn't be at all possible without the financial support of all the people whose names you see on the screen right now. And if you want to unlock secret bonus episodes, content that we can't post anywhere else, or get the videos early before anyone else gets to see them, please go on to patreon.com/theserfs. For as little as $1, you can help support this channel and help make more videos like this possible. Our executive producers are Anna Loves Riley, Adrian McCarthy, Bobby Lasers, Cheryl Alvarez, Comrade Junkie, Doug Caddy, Everything Important, Garrett Sandoval, Hagbard Celine, Jimmy Sombrero, Multimondi, Omni, Political Papi, Preston Kroll, Quiet 185, Richard Boehm, Riley and Anna, Roller Dragon, Cernicus, Stellar Gwyn, Sebastian Demel, Tigwig, Trav, and Words Greenwood. And also, it wouldn't be possible without all the names you see on the screen right now. Again, if you want to help produce this content, it's only made possible through the funding of our patrons. Head on down to patreon.com/theserfs